Good afternoon, viewers. On Monday, the 4th of October 2021, the Honourable Colm Imbert, Minister of Finance, presented in the Parliament a 52.4 billion national budget for the fiscal year 2022. The theme of Trinidad and Tobago's National Budget Statement 2022 was entitled Resilience in the Face of a Global Pandemic. With that being said, it's very important to understand the key figures. Total revenue, 43.33 billion. Total expenditure in terms of net of capital repayments and sinking fund contribution, 52.429 billion. This leaves a fiscal deficit of 9.096 billion. Which, given the pandemic and resulting economic and social impacts, this is not surprising. Last Friday, the expenditure of 297,761,000 was accepted a part of the schedule for the Ministry of Sport and Community Development. Today, in episode 68 of Futsal868 Corner Talks, we discuss sport in the budget, a review of the 2022 national budget. Our guests are Ms. Kwanieze John, Sport Development Practitioner, Mr. Ramdeo, General Manager, Sales and Marketing at the Trinidad and Tobago Postal Corporation, Mr. Richard Goddard, Boys Program Head Coach at Bishop High School, and Mr. Garvin Warwick, Past President of the Basketball Federation of Trinidad and Tobago. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Before we give our opening remarks, let's take time to review the Finance Minister's words to sport and youth. And I'm going to read it out for us. Madam Speaker, despite the onset of the pandemic and the limits placed on physical activity, which used to safeguard the lives of our citizens, sport remains a key component of our national agenda, and we will continue to recognize the role sport plays in nation building. As such, we are expecting that all sporting events with fans attending will be permitted once again in 2022. Good news. However, this depends on the success of our vaccination program. Madam Speaker, let me take this opportunity to thank and congratulate all our athletes who competed at the recently concluded Tokyo Olympic Games. They made us very proud, and we wish them great success in Paris 2024. It continues. Madam Speaker, I am pleased to report that despite delays in government construction as a result of lockdown measures, we have constructed the Maruga Sport and Youth Multi-Purpose Facility, the Laventille Community Swimming Pool, and as well as concluded constructional assessments for all our stadia with a view to full rehabilitation. We have also upgraded numerous corporation grounds, including the Honeymoon Recreation Ground in El Dorado, the Aranguez Recreation Ground, and the Mon Diablo Recreation Ground. Upgrade works are nearing completion at the Sevilla Golf Club in Vancouver, Mahika Oval in Point Fortin, the Dwight York Stadium in Tobago, community swimming pools at Mova and Maloney, and other recreational grounds at Bookmalatris, Marak, Grand Riviere, and Springvale. Madam Speaker, plans are also underway for this country to host several major sport events. The government has approved the submission of a bid to host matches in January 2022 of the ICC Men's Under-19 Cricket World Cup, and we are considering the Trinidad and Tobago's cricket board's interest in hosting games during England's tour of the West Indies in February 2022. We will also be supporting the Trinidad and Tobago Powerboat Association's International P1 Circuit event, which is scheduled for February 2022. We expect that these plans will assist in activation of our potential to build our sports tourism product. In addition, we will continue to fund our athletes through an enhanced elite athlete assistance program. One of the things I can say before I give the opening remarks to each one of you, starting with Ms. John, ladies first, of course, is at least we have more words in this budget than we had in last year's. Right? So, Mr. Imbert, I must say thank you very much. Fellow Zimbumba, I appreciate the fact that we were able to speak more to sport. So let's start with you, Ms. John, as regards to your thoughts to the budget.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this discussion on sports and the budget. I think when I read the budget, I don't read it in isolation and just sport as a sport for development practitioner. I read the budget in its entirety, and if we look at the the social sector program and we look at health, it's a health has a very interesting component that speak to sport that will not be mentioned by Mr. Imbert when he speaks on sport and community development, etc. So that would be my food for thought as we start the conversation on the sport and the budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I move on to Mr. Garvin Warwick, past president of the National Basketball Federation of Trinidad and Tobago.
So, Geoffrey, thank you very much for having me this afternoon. To all the viewers and the rest of the panel, good afternoon. For me, it wasn't surprising in terms of historically, sports has been one of and continue to be one of the lowest in terms of spend. But as Kwanieze would have said, you really have to look at it from a holistic point of view to determine where and how we utilize the funding that is granted in sport. So it's really important that it's really a process of prioritizing the spend that we have, because we understand this isn't by shock or by that this has happened to us in terms of the sporting sector. So we have to be, as it says, it's a resilient. We as sports personalities and sports persons have been resilient for a number of years. Not even, yes, the pandemic is here, but we've always been resilient when it comes to preparation and involvement and how funding is spent and allocated through the government. So that's it for me, and I'm looking forward to a very good discussion this afternoon.
Mr. Ramdeo, who has many hats, TTCB, WICB, and most recently, congratulations on accomplishing your latest, which is postgrad diploma in sport management. So, Mr. Ramdeo, tell us your opinion as regards to the budget and what was read on Monday before.
Thank you, Geoffrey, and thank everyone on the panel and for inviting me. The theme for the budget chosen by the finance minister, resilience in the face of the pandemic, certainly set the tone. And if you go by that alone and resetting the agenda, certainly no one would have, it would have been unexpected that the budget would have, for the allocation for sport would have been perhaps half of 1% of the entire budget. What I saw with that, it tells me that there is, of course, need to put more money and the allocation into health and to national security and so on. But sport has been dormant for a considerable time, and certainly we needed to have a lot more allocation within sport if we are going to move from where we are and where we have been in the pandemic to where we need to be. There is a symbiotic relationship between sport and tourism, and I feel that that area should have been pointed together to take Trinidad and Tobago in terms of brand Trinidad and Tobago. Another key area of the budget that I looked at, in terms of while the finance minister moved the ceiling from 6 million to 12 million based on corporate sponsors and the tax write-off, if one remembers back in the day, the tax write-off was about 150% of the spend. Perhaps we need to see that kind of incentive, because marketing is going to be a key component in terms of getting Trinidad and Tobago back as one of the major sporting countries in the world, and perhaps setting our place in the West Indies and the Caribbean once again. So those are some of the things that initially I would have liked to see in terms of bringing sport tourism into it, and looking at the incentivizing corporate Trinidad and Tobago in a bigger way, so that they're able to put monies into sport, and realize the set objectives.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ramdeo. Another individual who wears many hats, both in Tobago and where he's from and based, and also in Trinidad, is Mr. Richard Goddard, who is we leave him last, not in any disrespectful manner, but definitely to hear the voice of Tobago shout out. How do you feel this budget as regards to sport and sport in Tobago?
Well, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, Jeffrey, for having me again. That was part of this program previously. The budget as it stands, it's along the lines of what I would have expected. The whole concept of highlighting facilities and bringing facilities up to par is something that kind of comes with the territory. It's really one of the biggest expenditures that there is when it comes to sports and recreation in Trinidad and Tobago. And in Tobago, specifically through the Tobago House of Assembly, you'd find that upkeep of facilities is always a bit of a concern. But for what it's worth, it's pretty much what I guess it was supposed to be, what I would have expected it to be. The perennial nature of budgets, national budgets on sport being, I dare say, one of the least concerns of a national budget, and that continues to remain. I think it's not this government, it's previous government as well. So for me, it really actually wasn't very much different in a pandemic situation. Probably what it would have been, I wasn't going to expect anything extravagant. We all know the situation the country's in, and for what it's worth, when we looked at the budget earlier, the deficit is one of many deficits over the better part of about 20 years. And this has just kind of continued to build and build and build. And, with these deficits come one of the first things that governments tend to do is to look at sports and recreation and to where they could cut there. And, it's more than likely going to happen again, just because that's just been how it is. And I don't think a lot of persons actually really and truly understand the value of sport and recreation to the entire society. But we'll wait and see how much of that the government takes into consideration later on in the.
It's very interesting to hear somewhat of disparity amongst the opening remarks, and I actually love it, because this group of sporting professionals who have a long history within the different niches of the local sporting landscape and even the regional sporting landscape really resounds to what we want to achieve for this discussion. And then moving on the conversation, I love how Ms. John would have opened and said that we cannot look at the allocation to the Ministry of Sport and Community Development alone. We have to look at the entire budget. However, just for the sake of the fact that we are speaking sport and the budget, let's just take a quick look at the allocation from the the Ministry of Sport and Community Development, noting, as I said before, the amount that was given to the Ministry of Sport and Community Development, and noting I also want to take time to note the figures that we're speaking to. 2022 estimates 297,761,000 compared to 2021 revised estimates of 255,882,000. That's without surprising given the fact that COVID-19 has taken place. But what I would like us to really focus on are the items, personal expenditure, as always in all of the budgets, and I do this specifically to the students who look at our show so that they understand that is the breakdown to the figure. So we look at personal expenditure, goods and services, minor equipment purchases, current transfers and subsidies, which represents the total recurrent expenditure of for 2022, 272,461,000. Development program, 25,300,000. Lady and gent, I would like to hear your thoughts as to this budget. And I will start with Mr. Warwick first. Having the experience with dealing with a budget, please give us your take, your insight to a budget like this, and what does the breakdown means in terms of the common man, the normal man, the man in the street. What does each of these line items speak to?
So for me, put simply, the recurrence expenditure is the day-to-day running of activities within the ministry, and that's really the bulk of what is happening, because as we say, we're coming out of a pandemic, so it's really about keeping the Ministry of Sport afloat over the, well, we would have seen it in the last budget, of course we would have seen it again. But in terms of the capital project, the 25 million, I would really want to see how that is broken down, because that is really where the prioritization and what we do. While they would have identified the maintenance and upgrade of particular grounds, the question is, what studies have shown or gone in to say in terms of the utilizations or programs that will be implemented at these specific geographic locations that will allow us to facilitate and really get bang for our buck in terms of spend, and that is what I need to understand from that 25 million. And again, how do we create the synergies between what we have to spend and what is allocated, and aligning the corporate and the tax breaks that are being offered to really optimize what sport can put out in terms of a product, in terms of the development and of course the product of sport itself.
Thank you very much for that. And that jumps straight into the next question, where I will have a lead off. Where the mission of the Department of Physical Education and Sport is to enhance lives through participation, quality, training, and excellence in sport. Noting that the two pillars of national policy are 1, total participation of sport, and 2, high performance. Ms. John, how do we see the budget tied into those two pillars and the mission, noting what Mr. Warwick would have just spoken to in terms of wanting to see development, a little more development, and where is that, 25 million, Garvin, where is that going to go? Tell us your opinions.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the things that we always, as Trinidadians, want to know is the maintenance of our facilities, right? And ensuring that they are up to par for use. So I think over the years, that has been a recurring expenditure in our budget. Where we sometimes fall short is the programming, and who's ultimately responsible for programming at these facilities. And I think that's a question that we are yet to answer as a nation. Who is responsible? Is it the NGBs? Is it the Ministry of Sport? Is it the Ministry of Health? And I think once we're able to answer that question, I think that we'll be able to reprioritize and innovate how we spend our money.
As well as local government as well.
Including local government. So who's responsible for the programming? And I think once we answer that question, we'll be able to maximize maximize the spend and also meet that target of total participation. As you know, that is where I, as a sport for development practitioner, that is where our focus is ensuring that everybody has access to quality sport.
And I think
Access. Go ahead, Mr. Ramdeo. Go ahead.
what is important as well is to identify, and you guys laid it out clearly, where the ministries would come in, the various arms of the government would come in terms of the developing and maintaining the facilities. You spoke about local government, you spoke about health. They have to be clear because you don't want to have overlap taking place or in terms of the development and the upkeep of these facilities. So that'll be key in terms of understanding where does one of those ministries start and where in terms of their remit and where it ends in that regard.
Well, I mean, the fact that we actually even are trying to figure out, okay, well, how does the money get spent, kind of shows exactly where we are. There's a big gap when it comes to monies going into the Ministry of Sport, or in Tobago's case, the Division of Sport, and exactly where it's prioritized now. If we keep on talking about the maintenance of facilities, we actually need to make sure that we have persons who can do the work to maintain these facilities. And I mean, I'm kind of sorry to say, but governments are notorious for having persons who may not be qualified to do a certain job, doing that job. And if, as persons in sport, we are very well aware that if that ends up being the case, you will tend to have a subpar product regardless of which sport it is or which venue is to be maintained, or anything along the lines. So it's not just a prioritizing of making sure the facility is actually maintained, is ensuring the persons who are doing the maintenance understand exactly what they're doing. So the facility itself is always ready and available for use. And I know I have seen that as an issue in Tobago. I'm fairly certain it's an issue in Trinidad. And it's one thing on top of the next, but because a facility is easily seen by many members of the public, it's one of the first things people tend to see. And the impression of that immediately translates to the impression of the entity that's actually in charge of whichever it is, whether it is the Ministry or, like I said, it's a biggest case, the Division of Sport and Youth Affairs. So, we have a fair amount of trying to figure out exactly how this works. But I am of the opinion that we can't really figure out how it works until we actually sort out the inner workings before we make sure that that part of it, that facilities part of it, actually is one of our beacons of success. And we have so many that that 25 million is going to be stretched incredibly thin. And there again lies a problem. There are just way too many facilities for the kind of maintenance that actually has to take place.
So, Geoffrey, I would just want to jump back in quickly for 1 sec there. In terms of the administration that we speak about, because we spoke about the allocation, but Kwanieze spoke on in terms of the of understanding who rules and in terms of the ministry, the corporations. But under the Sport Commission Steering Committee, that was one of the actual mandates that was set up for them to assess in terms of understanding where rules and some of the remits fall under. And that document was submitted and then resubmitted by a planning committee again in a second edition. So there is, I mean, for simple example, there's still a position called a sport and physical education, sport education officer, PESO, in the Ministry of Sport. And you have to understand persons' role. Where Richard spoke about having persons in the right position. We're talking about limited budget, identifying the right target in terms of spend, with the right skill sets. So we really have to define that from an administrative standpoint, and really, as I said, get our bang for our buck that we invested in sport.
I'm very much happy that Miss John is here, because what I'm hearing, guys, is two things: strategic planning, whether lack of or we don't, and sport for development, noting the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And the reason why a lot of people may ask, why are you even bringing this into play? Because we have to understand the hierarchy of thinking to be able to understand where we are and where we need to be. And Gavin, you made some brilliant points. So let's just take a quick moment to familiarize ourselves to what we are speaking to. The United Nations have set out 17 goals, sustainable development goals, of which members of the UN would have signed on to. And in terms of your policy making, your developmental programs, of which the budget is tied into from the Ministry of Sport and Community Development, some of these goals will be a part of set, right? I want to dive in this first and foremost with Ms. John, and then move on to Mr. Ramdeo, in that order, as to where do you think that we can achieve sustainable development with the present budget? And let us look at it from the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, just straight dollars and cents, and in terms of forward thinking.
Yeah, so in terms, first and foremost, I think let me differentiate when we say sport development and sport for development, because it's two different categories of thinking, strategic planning, etc. With sport for development, we focus on a social integration. So health and well-being, sport can help with that. We're talking about quality education. We're looking at physical education as part of the product and education. And, all the other facets, when we think about climate, we're thinking about sustainable sporting facilities, etc. So when we think about sport development, we're talking about the medals. We're talking about how many participants we have in our particular sport, right? So I just wanted to clear that up in case anyone, wondering what's the difference. With that being said, and that's why I started with, we as sport and thinking sustainable development can't think about the budget, just sport, what is the allocation for sport and development, because sport has an integral role in nation building, as Mr. Imbert said, but it's not in isolation. What is the mandate of health, and how can we reduce their spend in health? And that's where sport comes in. When we look at creating opportunities for persons who have to help reduce NCDs, that is sport for development. That is the sustainable development goals. That is sport contributing to nation building. And I think often as administrators, we're not fully aware of the power that we have as sport to help our nation with those aspects of healthy living and all the other components of the in achieving the development goals. So that would be it. That's what I think about when I think about the budget. How can sports help health? How can sport help poverty? How can sport help us as a nation achieve those things without that narrow perspective of developing my sport?
Mr.
Jeffrey,
Ramdeo?
to answer your question, the simple answer is no. I don't think we can achieve what we set out to, because if you go back to pre-pandemic 2019, we were on a trajectory. All of that has gone and moved out of the way. So basically, what the minister is saying, we are resetting the agenda. and all those things that will come into play. We haven't had persons out there recreating, training, gyms, everything has been basically closed. So when you look at the health on the health side of our country, we're really resetting that as well. Quite apart from COVID, people not being able to train, being out there to go to gyms, to go to conduct a healthy lifestyle. All of that is going to cost us. So we have to start from that point again in terms of how do we get the young people out there, getting them interested, getting them to understand diet, getting them to understand how their bodies are changing. All of that will impact as we go forward and as we reset the agenda. And I want to keep using that term because that's what we are doing. In order for us to start to begin to climb out of this hole that we have found ourselves in via the pandemic, and really look at the development holistically. So we are going to start with this budget, and it's going to take us a few more budgets allocations before we really get back to pre-pandemic period in terms of where we were on the map in terms of being able to sustain ourselves, look at our health situation, climate control, and then all the facilities and so on that is required to make sure we are competitive, not just regionally, but internationally again.
I will come to the facility, but I want to speak to you from a marketing standpoint. How do you suggest to the Ministry of Sport and Community Development to reset, to get that message of reset to the citizens? And I'll give you a reason why I'm saying this. Our culture is a party culture. And I'm seeing over and over again where a lot of persons are becoming frustrated. Yes, we know that as soon as, a lot of persons are exercising at the same point in time. But in my opinion, I believe that when the doors are open, we are going to be competing with the party culture. We are not competing against another sport. We're not competing against another NSO, another NGB. How are we going to, in return to play, communicate successfully, communicate efficiently and effectively to our stakeholders that this is the right thing to do? And I use those words carefully, the right thing to do. Choose sport for health, for development over anything else. How do you suggest we do that, Mr. Ramdeo? How do you suggest the Ministry of Sport and Community Development, the Tobago House of Assembly Division of Sport and Youth Affairs, communicate that to the stakeholders?
So they can use all the media that they possibly would be able to buy, and it still would not give you the result you're looking for. What it calls upon now is that every NSO and every sporting organization in Trinidad and Tobago need to put their hand up. This is the time, as never before, that each sporting organization will be called to account in terms of the sport and the development in which their sport is expected to go. So they're going to be required to, one, and it's something that I have always said that should be done, sporting organizations should become more marketable and more marketing oriented. Things like a marketing plan. We should stop thinking that it's just a communications item that we should be doing for sporting organization. You should have a sustainable marketing plan. You should look at your sponsorship. You should look at how do I provide audiences. We talk about sponsorship not readily coming, but us NSOs providing audiences for sponsors to really sell and target their products. So that needs to happen. That message needs to permeate the society through this sporting organization. So if you're in cricket, the Trinidad and Tobago Cricket Board must find creative and clever ways in which they must be able to reach their members, their fans, their target market. Similarly, the Trinidad and Tobago Football Association, power boards, and all entities must appreciate the fact that we are no longer, it's not business as usual as we like to see. It is now an opportunity that each stakeholder is responsible for their target market. The ministry cannot do it alone. So the arms of the Ministry of Sport and Community Development are the sporting organizations that represent the various sporting disciplines. So we're going to have that discussion, whether it's a national discussion, it's going to be a very, very difficult discussion, but organizations going to need to find creative ways of funding themselves and funding campaigns that would ensure that sport remains healthy, it remains the first choice, and remains sustainable, and that's the key thing. It must be sustainable, and they must do it in concert with the Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs and Community Development. It must not be each organization operating in a satellite kind of environment.
Jeffrey, I
Mr.
wanted,
Warwick,
sorry,
go ahead,
I wanted to jump in here. I think it's to add to what Carl is saying, but also to challenge a bit, because yes, we need that, but the NSOs and NGBs need staffing to do that. And I think one of the challenges that the NSOs face is having the quality staffing, not quality staffing, having the staffing to do what is required to be marketable. Most of these NSOs are skeletal, if you want to put it that way, and are operating from a volunteer basis. And what we have to see is a redirection in the investment if we want to really get that result that Carl spoke to. And I say that because to come up with that marketing plan, you need the brains to do that. And you need a team to do that. And it's so much a volunteer team can do in the sense of create it, implement it, and make sure that it's sustainable. And when we talk about having these expectations of organizations, we really have to look at what they're working with, and are we setting realistic expectations of them. We have a cadre of graduates looking for opportunities, but of course, after having studied at school, their I guess what they're trying to achieve is to
Some
have
sustainability, yeah.
some security. Thanks, Garvin. Have some security in creating their livelihood, and if that isn't the case, then we lose the talent that are passionate about sport and creating these markets, etc. And then we in the same boat, right? So I think from an investment perspective for government, if we really want to see sport flourish, we have to rethink how we invest in the human resource for sport.
So
Right.
I want to tie into both points, right?
Yeah.
And to say both points are very valid. From a government standpoint, we based on the it comes down to dollars and cents. We cannot afford as a government to maintain 52 governing bodies. Let's be real.
Yeah.
We are trying to split the resources and the funding that we have into 52, but yet we are asking the top performers in terms of cricket, football, volleyball, in terms to be able to perform, at their peak. What I really think needs to happen is there has to be a tier, and it was started when Sport Company was developed. They would have identified a few key sports that they would have started to work with, and we really need to outfit and put the right resources into these organizations. And when we identify those numbers, then we have to come back and say, okay, those outside of that pool, yes, corporate TNT, bring corporate TNT around the table and say, this is the incentives, the tax incentives and the other incentives that we are offering. We need to support. How do you align based on your goals and objectives and your organization? How do you align to specific sports? And how can you support these particular sports? So there is some, from a government standpoint, there is some decision making that has to happen. And I really think that we cannot continue along the path where, yes, and I understand as a government we have to facilitate all. I agree, but from a spending perspective, we have to prioritize our spending, and it has to be performance based, and it has to be long term in terms of if it's an Olympic cycle, a World Cup cycle, and be very clear in those objectives. So if you meet the targets, you remain where you are. If you miss those targets, there's an opportunity for other organizations to capitalize. So for me, I mean, that's even very, very important part of the puzzle.
Yeah, I think if I may jump back in here, Jeffrey, I think we can't see it as an ad hoc approach. I'll repeat what I said before. It's not business as usual. So in terms of funding these NSOs and funding the sporting organization, they need to look inward. They need to look, but with the help, correct, Garvin, with the help of the sport company of Trinidad and Tobago, with the help of the Ministry of Sport, in terms of understanding it's a business you're running. It's not just a sport that you do casually. It's not, you're not managing a sport for casual way. It's a business, and if you see it in the context of business as occurs in the international arena, we have to start looking at a business plan. These NSOs are accountable. They have to provide information to the government for funding. You need to start organizing yourself into that frame of mind that this is a business that I'm running. And if I'm business, I have to budget. I have to budget for certain items. And one key would be, of course, human resources. To staff our entity with the right resources, persons who can add value when they come into the organization. So and that's why I talked about marketing. It's not just also bringing a group and sending a proposal out to a Republic Bank or to an insurance company. It goes deeper than that. It's about building a plan, whether it's a 3-year plan, and inside of that plan, encapsulating your marketing, your branding. How am I going to make Trinidad and Tobago cricket board a brand? What do I have within the cricket board? What do I have within basketball? The players that we have that can brand our entity. Then with that, we go now to the next stage. How do we take that information and turn it into a benefit for our would-be sponsors? And it's not just a job that you give us 6 weeks to a consultant. Marketing an entity now in sport is a full-time job. And it must be seen as a business. If we don't see it as a business, we will come cap in hand to the ministry, to the sport company every so often. We need to look at our agenda, our events throughout the year. How are we going to not wait till the event come to find a sponsor? We need to have these things pre-sponsored in advance. And all of that, of course, the return on that, of course, is to provide the audience for your sponsor. And that's what they pay you for, to get a return on their investment. So yes, we need to have the right human resource employed, but to do that, you need money, and money can only come when we see ourselves and set ourselves up as a business entity, where it's money coming into the system. Then we can do development. Of course, we can hire an extra coach. We can then do high performance training, and then we can think about marketing ourselves. For instance, when an NSO or sport entity finds a talent, that in itself is a future payment I have there, because somebody in the world, some big team in the world will pick up this youngster, whether it be in basketball, the Atlanta Hawks picks up a boy from Rio Claro. Kyron Pollard is picked up by the Mumbai Indians. They have to pay for that. That is not a free, that they just pass on this talent to them. So we have to start thinking in that mind frame, that we are looking at new talent, generating new talent, and this talent is going to be future financial prospects for our NSO.
Great input by all. We want to take a quick break, but when we come back, we want to speak more to this from a Tobago perspective, where we have Mr. Goddard, who would give us some of his insight when it comes to marketing of Tobago sport. Sounds good, doesn't it? We'll be right back. You're watching Futsal868 Corner Talks, Sporting the Budget, with these lovely professionals. We'll be right back.
This is NX Prime. We've all been through so much during the last 18 months. Lives have been lost. Jobs. Our livelihoods have been challenged. Some of us are on the brink of maybe doing something desperate. On this day being Mental Health Awareness Day, let's all remember how far we've come and how far we have to go. This is MX Prime, reminding you to keep your minds healthy.
Greetings, it's your boy Kivo, and I want to fully endorse Mental Health Awareness Day, October the 10th. And I want to talk to the youth. I want you guys to take it easy. What does easy mean? E, enjoy things you haven't done in a while. Painting, gaming, doesn't matter. Enjoy it. A, access mental health resources to talk about stuff. S, sleep. Don't spend time up in all hours of the night. Make sure you sleep. And Y, go in the yard. Spend time with nature. Mental health awareness is important.
So yes, we are back. Futsal868 Corner Talks on our usual Sunday at 4 p.m. This Sunday we're speaking sport and the budget, and we have with us Mr. John, Sport for Development Practitioner, Mr. Carl Ramdeo, who is Sales and Marketing General Manager for TNT Postal Corporation, Mr. Garvin Warwick, who is a former president of the National Basketball Federation, Trinidad and Tobago, and Mr. Richard Goddard, who is the performance head coach for boys at the Bishop High School. So before the break, we were speaking to marketing and trying to get our national governing bodies and our national sporting organizations to take pride in themselves, create a product, a brand that persons can financially partner with them, i.e., take some strain off of the budget, the government, and see what we could do for ourselves. Let's start a walk, at least creep, take it off. So, Mr. Goddard, tell us your take as regards to how do you see marketing? So let's look at your school, Bishop's High School, and looking at the allocation to the Tobago House of Assembly from the Tobago House of Assembly, that will obviously trickle down to your school and also to the citizens of Tobago. How do you see marketing of sporting activities on the Isle, the sister Isle, making sense?
Marketing of sport on the island has been, and based on what I've seen in Tobago, very, very challenging. I'm of the opinion that I don't think people appreciate marketing. They may appreciate communication, but they're not necessarily in tune with the concept of marketing. They're not in tune fully with going out and doing surveys or meet and greets, as happens with politicians around election times and whatnot. Gathering information, data collecting. I don't think we've gotten to that point just yet. I dare say that would probably be the same nationally, and it has definitely shown how much of a revamp that needs to be done on the island of Tobago when it comes to actually putting your product out, so persons could know your product, understand your product, appreciate your product, be willing to try your product, and then become consumers of the product itself. So I'll take for one example. I think last year around July, August time, there was the a T10 cricket blast that was put forward in collaboration with the Division of Sports and Youth Affairs, the Tobago Cricket Association, and one or two other entities. And, they had to try to figure out, okay, well, where are we going to put this thing? And without batting an eye, they said, you know what, we're going to go up to Roxborough. And the question that was asked why, and the answer was simple. The windward side of the island is a bit more appreciative of sporting environments and events, especially something like cricket. And because they knew that this was the case, they were able to actually target that specific area of Tobago to have persons come to be viewers, supporters of the game, fans at the game. And even if there wasn't anything else that was going on around, the rearranging of the actual tournament from a 20 limited overs T20 to T10 created a different environment totally, and it gave the game of cricket and the concept of sport marketing something that was critical to be added to the entire concept. Additionally, they worked out details that had some of the national and West Indies cricketers come to Tobago and actually play. I believe I think it was DJ Bravo, Karen Pollard, and quite a few others. I think Puran as well came up, and again it created something a little different. Now, because it was assisted as well with the Ministry of Sport as well, there was funding for that. That doesn't happen for most organizations. In fact, you'd be hard pressed to find an organization that actually has a marketing budget that is that actually applies. When I say applies, the amount that the budget has in it is very much applicable to the amount of marketing that has to be conducted by the organization. And with that being said, you really have a bit of a gap between the organization's understanding of what marketing is and being able to put marketing at the forefront of the organization or the event's success. So it becomes a very difficult thing. It's been something that I know the Division of Sport has been trying to work into it with some of the sport development officers, trying to go into communities and talking to some of the organizations. But in the majority of cases in Tobago and Trinidad, the organizations simply don't have the actual capacity of personnel to do that kind of work. They have to rely on general knowledge of the people that they deal with. And at this point in time, we know that's really and truly it's not sufficient enough for these organizations to have that and to be able to function efficiently. You do need personnel that actually caters to that. And it's a difficult ask. I'll admit it. It's a very difficult ask. It's something that is being worked on, but in a volunteer-esque community, sport community that is in Tobago, you'll be hard pressed to find those persons who would be willing to put that time in to marketing, or even anything else really. That's something that is that specific, and it simply has its downfalls, and it's something that has to be kind of worked through with young personnel maybe coming through. But we have to remember these young persons coming through also are looking for opportunities, not just for a volunteer, but they're actually looking for employment. And none of the organizations in Tobago can actually provide that particular one, which is a critical aspect of new day. Well, not even new day, but past day, but even more so nowadays, the fact that employment is such a critical thing, and actually being able to conduct your own personal business and having the funds to do that it is a very, very, very difficult ask to have that kind of specific marketing ideals on the island, admittedly.
Right. And Jeffrey, if I may jump in a bit here for 1 second, and that's the point I was making. It should not, sport marketing should not be in isolation. There's a relationship with tourism. And certainly when you have a cricket tournament in Tobago, you're not selling cricket per se. You're really selling tourism. You're selling cuisine. You're selling culture. There's so many things that you're selling in tourism that applies to sport. And out of the resources that Richard is lacking in terms of the marketing knowledge and so on, all of that can come from a relationship between tourism and sport. One can feed off the other because tourism needs sport because that is the attraction. And within sporting events, you have, of course, all the elements. You see it on the CPL. When you have CPL being broadcast across the Caribbean and they're playing in Barbados, there is a segment in each of those matches that you have to highlight and showcase Barbados, Trinidad, depending on where you're playing. So there is a relationship, and we need to capitalize on that. We talk about sport tourism, but I think it's just talk, but we really haven't walked the talk where that marriage needs to take place. And then the benefits to be had in terms of bringing in interest into the country, the Twin Island Republic, bringing in foreign exchange, and so many other benefits that could spin off of that can facilitate improvement to sport and improvement to tourism as well.
It's a very interesting as we speak to this whole concept and idea of sport tourism. And the reason I say concept, because personally I don't believe that we have really grasped sport tourism. Given the fact that the government is interested in when return to play actually takes place, Powerboat have an international event, and cricket continue to have international events in Trinidad and Tobago, which means a continuation of sport tourism with these two national governing bodies. Garvin, I want to ask you from that standpoint, as a past president of a national governing body, do you really think that we understand sport tourism? And if your organization, your past organization, even your present organization for your basketball club was to do an international and an intra-island competition, which is also sport tourism, from us going from Trinidad going to Tobago and vice versa, that's also sport tourism. Our persons don't understand that. Do you really think that the powers that be, both from a governmental and also from a private sector standpoint, really understand what can happen with sport tourism? And then, Ms. John, I want you to chime in as regards to the sport development side of it, because mega events and the sustainability of mega events when it comes to sport tourism that we are trying to, in my opinion, follow the concept of bigger entities, jurisdictions, and countries. Do you think that we really have, we are able to sustain such events? So first, you, Mr. Warwick.
So for me, no, we really have not grasped the concept of sport tourism as yet. And I say that to say, I mean, I know there is a sport tourism policy being developed or draft, but we really have to be strategic in our approach, because I mean, we are set based on our geographic location, based on our facilities, based on our weather, based on our culture. We are really set to be a mecca for sport tourism, and you name it. It's across these platforms. It's not just basketball. I mean, we have 8 indoor facilities, but let's take a look at the cycling velodrome, the tennis center, the aquatic center. We should be hosting or facilitating, but that requires a lot of planning, preparation, and investment from the government, but also the national governing bodies. And it's really, they're all connected, because according to Carl, Mr. Ramdeo, he said, based on our planning and really doing a a full strategic plan with that, which includes your marketing plan and how are we going to showcase, tying in tourism, tying in the Ministry of Sport. It's really because they're all intertwined in each other. So, I mean, I'm glad to see some conversations being continued with UCI in terms of utilizing the cycling velodrome as a satellite. I know the ITF is also in conversation with tennis TT with in terms what does that mean? That is significant for us because when we are recognized as a satellite venue, yes, we get the international athletes coming here to train, which is a spin-off of our culture, our food, our hotels, our transport being utilized. But they also bring their sponsors, their bike sponsors and their frame sponsors or their racket sponsors, shoe sponsors. Those are persons that will actually be brought in to support, and that then allows the venues to be much more marketable and of course bringing their own sponsorship, because that with that comes the dollars and cents to allow it to become a little more sustainable and kind of wean off of the government support. But again, government has to be one of the driving forces in those elements that needs to kick it off and get it those conversations. So I'm very glad to see those conversations happening with the tennis and cycling. Of course, we want to see it happening with the aquatic center and the diving. I think we are not tapping into and really utilizing that diving center that we have. Um, and of course, the input of the swimming and that association has to get involved with that process. And from a club perspective, I mean, when you talk in the importance of hosting international events from a basketball perspective, I mean, we would like to. Currently, there's a few tournaments that could be hosted in Trinidad based on the current environment, pandemic, and of course, we're shifting um, tournaments because of the pandemic, but we have hosted a successful T20 tournament. I mean, multiple tournaments locally, and we have shown the capacity to be able to execute. And that is where we really need to start and capitalize on what is happening now to position ourselves as a tourism and sport sector that is a mecca for the region.
Ms. John?
Yeah, so I really want to add to Garvin's comment about it being a process. And it's a process, and in solidifying ourselves as a mecca of for sport tourism, it's a process, and we have to celebrate the little achievements we've had on the way. So yes, we can sustain these can can sustain these events once we've started, because again we would be developing the capacity and having these people having the human resource to manage these mega events, and not always having to bring in an entire team like what is usually done for the CPL. We give the locals the opportunity to manage these events, and we give our locals the opportunity to grow and develop and continue to love what they do as sport practitioners. So yes, we have the opportunity to do that, to be a sport tourism mecca. What I would say is that again, the investment in the human resource is key, and again, the investment has to come through the NSOs, because the NSOs have the responsibility of developing the personnel to host these events. And that is where the collaboration and the sustainability will come.
I don't want to prolong this whole concept and conversation on sport tourism. But with all due respect, Ms. John and Mr. Warwick, I really, no, as a matter of fact, I will say this way. I really believe, given the fact that we have the Tourism Development Corporation or company, what is it? TDC, where there was a department for sports and sport tourism. And we have been having this conversation as regards to sport tourism for over, I would say, over 10 years. Literally to the point whereby, if you look at the calendar of events, Tobago, 10 years ago, in terms of sport tourism, to today, you'll see the amount of events that no longer exist. We used to have beach soccer. We used to have Tobago Sevens rugby. We used to have
Tobago cycle club.
yeah, we used to have kite sailing. We used to have. I mean, there was so Nikki Board and her family used to have a lot of activities in the month of January. So you could have looked at a calendar from literally January to December, and every single month there was a sport tourism activity, literally, that was of international repute, that brought a lot of persons to the sister isle, that brought in a lot of revenue, trickle-down effect, blah, 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 blah. And if you go to every single one of these sport practitioners or sport tourism practitioners and you ask them why they are no longer there, you will be surprised at the commonality of their answers, which points to the fact that we as stakeholders, bottom up, top down, do not understand, appreciate sport tourism. And I really would like us, and I say us, all of us, to be able to speak to some solutions of how it is we can resolve this issue, and see how we can be able to really not only look at it from a Trinidad and Tobago standpoint, but really and truly a regional standpoint to really appreciate what we have and develop what we have. With that being said, let me just allow me the opportunity to move on to another point. The sport company of Trinidad and Tobago in 2021 fiscal year was allocated 78 million. For 2022, it is estimated that they are now allocated 69.6 million, a decline of 8.37 million. This continues along the conversation we are having because the sport company of Trinidad and Tobago, an arm of the Ministry of Sport and Community Development, is responsible for supporting the national governing bodies. With such a decline in a fiscal year where there will be return to play, do you see any negative spin-off? Do you see any problems? Do you see any issues as regards to this decline? I would start with anybody want to take it, or should I start with somebody?
Woo. Okay, I'll go. That's
all right, ladies
first. So I think that just from your personal budgeting, when you do have a source of income, you have to readjust your priorities. You readjust your priorities and you spend a bit more wisely. And I think that would be sport companies' board mandate at this point in time. Like, they have no control over that. And therefore, it's up to them as an organization to communicate to their stakeholders, which would be the 14 or so national sport organizations that are funded, to highlight and be open about what their priorities would be. And therefore, if as a sport organization, you have not aligned yourself with that priority, and or you have not aligned to that priority, and or haven't even rethink how you're going to operate coming back into play, then you would lose out, and that's the reality of the situation. And it's really about being proactive as an organization if you want to be supported through the sport company. And that's just my layman view on it.
I share view, and I also share view that we need to understand when you have limited resources, it gives us a perfect opportunity. I like to look at the glass half full.
Yeah.
It gives us a perfect opportunity to do an introspection in terms of our own NSOs, to understand how we could look at cost, to cut cost, but be more effective in terms of shaping our programs, our tournaments, our competitions. So really, the pandemic, while as bad as it may be, it gave us an opportunity to really reshape our organizations depending on what you have, and look at how we can make it leaner, make it better, make it more targeted towards our target market. Go into areas we even think about, maybe like media rights, and so on, in terms of your own sporting discipline. So really, while the resources are limited, or when you have scarce resources in an economy, it gives us that opportunity to look at cutting costs that we may have not overlooked had we had the opportunity to just be given funding, and we run off tournaments. It gives us an opportunity to think, and that renaissance that I'm talking about in terms of sport could possibly, folks, be the answer to all our woes collectively in terms of us coming together and joining with tourism. And I'll make that point again, and joining tourism and learning to market, because there should be some, whether it lies in the sport company or it lies in Tourism Trinidad Limited and Tourism Tobago Limited, there should be some division that aids looking at these sporting organizations as businesses, holding them to account, holding their hands as well, all through the process. So once we build that, we build these NSOs, it's a less reliant on the treasury, it's less reliant on the Ministry of Sport and Community Development, so we can utilize funds and channel them into other areas where we can look at sport development and looking at new talent emerging in Trinidad and Tobago.
I actually think the sport company has a very, very hard task, steep hill to climb when it comes to that. Because if you take out the current expenditure that the sport company has for facility maintenance, and really look at what they're actually going to invest from an NSO level, and just for instance, it's about $60,000 to $90,000 a month in chlorine for those pools in the aquatic center. And that's the aquatic center alone. We're not talking other maintenance that exist across the country. When you really look on, if you look back at the budgets and see where the percentages of funding would have gone into the NSOs, yes, they have, I think, 16 NSOs, I think, if I stand corrected, under their remit. But when you look at how much of that funding and who would have gotten the bigger pieces of the pie is really, really important to look at. And it really comes down to prioritization. And as Kwanieze said, Kwanieze, sorry, I keep my eyes always at my tie tap the tongue, but
that's why they simply say Miss John.
Miss John. All right. I need to pick that one up, yeah, Miss John. But it really comes down to those NSOs meeting there and being innovative and aligning to the service level agreement in the ministry, on the sport company, and ensuring that they get their piece of the pie. Because I know there are many sporting organizations that exist over the last 2 or 3 years that have not received funding for many different reasons. But what that is doing is really, because they are so heavily dependent upon the ministry and sport company, they are stifling their own growth, and they really need to become a little more innovative, as Carl would have said, and really define themselves and take the opportunity. I know, for instance, I could speak for basketball. I know basketball would have taken the time to host a lot of official courses and a lot of courses, refereeing officials, coaching courses, because what their plan is to really allow the clubs to become coaches to become better coaches at the club level. The referees, when you start to have games, the officiating is a lot better. And you would have seen they would have just launched in the Trinidad and Tobago National League, because the intention really and truly is try coming out of the pandemic to really position themselves as a sporting entity that could seek its own funding. One of the challenges they would face, of course, is the venues. I know we talk infrastructure, but when you look at the facilities around you, when you look at capacity, and we start talking marketing and viewership and audience and sponsorship, you look at the facilities and some of the capacities of these facilities. So it's as I continue to say, it's really based on our current environment. It now calls for all of the sporting stakeholders to really sit down, not in silos, but around a round table and have conversations to ensure that we move the sport product in the right direction.
Well said.
Yeah, so I agree. I agree with everyone. So it's and so Warwick, you're actually right. Sport company, I don't envy their position at all. Because we know they're going to be hands out. We know they're going to be a lot of organizations, kind of in a sense looking down the barrel of a gun and trying their best to figure out how can they get the organization to function, not even just to to sustain itself, just to function. And there is some creativity that needs to happen in terms of normal fundraising and getting volunteers to be part of the organization, understanding a bit of in Carl's case marketing, understanding the developmental structure pyramid. They may have to do some data collecting, and it may end up simply being that they have to do it with a bit of pain and pressure at the pipe. But we know this is it's the environment, it's the scenario, it's what we have to deal with right now. And as we've said already, it may weed out some, but it's probably something that is actually necessary under the circumstance to increase efficiency throughout the entire scope of sports across Trinidad and Tobago.
Sport company also has a role. Sport company also has to be very innovative in their approach as well, because they have those facilities. They really need to ramp up, and I know there are plans and conversations happening in the back end. So hopefully we'll see come into fruition in a short time. But really, strategically positioning our current facilities to universities in the US and the UK to train and of course earning their own revenues to become I wouldn't say self-sufficient, because of course the revenues go into the pot, but at least they could justify in terms of the conversation when it's happening at the end of the year, saying that, listen, we have been able to raise this amount, and how can we? And so it allows us a little more leverage as a sport to fight and bat for a little more money, for a better phrase.
And absolutely, Garvin, you're correct. And I'm thinking if I sat in that position, sport company, you are managing so many facilities that are marketable. Why recreate the wheel? You look around the US, you look around North America, and in order to raise funds, you see FedEx Field, you see Morgan Stanley. You can have a conversation with sponsors. Why not be the aquatic center be sponsored by a bank or insurance company? Things like that.
But Carl, I don't mean to cut you, but that sounds good in theory. Mm-hmm. But again, it goes back to the culture of Trinidad and Tobago, as well as business of sport. Do our stakeholders, top down, bottom up, even want to have their bank name on that facility? Does it give it the pound of flesh compared to, hey, I want to see my name for Carnival? Again, I don't think we love sport enough to be able to love and respect that what it is sport can give, so that we can be able to have the product affiliation. Right. Am I right? Am I wrong? Somebody throw in with me.
Yeah, I want to start come in here and share about that culture piece. I think we love I think we love sport. What we may have a problem with is organized sports. That's where the challenge is. Where organized sport is, we have a challenge, because when you go to the communities, they play sport. You go to any grounds, you would see people playing the cricket, they're playing, but when it comes to organized sport, I think that's where the challenge is. And that's where, that is where, the sponsorship, etc. comes in. So we have, as I say, if we look at our culture, we don't pay for sports here. We don't have a culture for paying for sports, so it's a hard ask. So we have a unique situation, and it really really takes some thought into digging into it, and we can't I can't foresee us using models of the United States and or England and or wherever else in the world, because the Caribbean is a unique space, and it's until we study ourselves that we will be able to find a solution.
I'm
That
not advocating to just
yeah,
adopt what obtains in the US. I'm just saying we
yeah,
can look at models and we can fashion our model separately. And you talk about being a party culture. Yes, so the National Brewing Company would say I would spend money on Carnival because it gives me a quick return. Persons are consuming my product on the road during the period of Carnival. I'm seeing advertisements on television, getting exposure, I'm getting brand awareness, and so on. But if we don't move away from centric cricket and football as being the two top sports in this country, and prominently push or propel swimming or basketball into the limelight, we are going to continue being in a situation where you only are really a two sport nation. Um, when you talk Trinidad and Tobago, whether people like it or not, it's cricket or football, and the majority of funding goes in that direction. The onus now is on for NSOs like basketball, for instance, swimming, for instance. They need to come to the fore. What can we do to propel our sport into the limelight, into the national community, so that sponsors will take notice of us? How do we get our fans, our members, and so on to start making our sport interesting? Why is it only everybody talks about CPL, it's cricket. When Trinidad and Tobago football, there's a game. I mean, the stadium has been packed. That doesn't happen all the time to other sporting entities. So we need to start looking at how do we just move away from a two-tiered cricket and football, and it'll come. I'm just saying, I'm not advocating to take anything wholesale and apply it. But sponsors, if you sell them on the idea that there's a very good return for their investment, it won't come wholesale and it won't come overnight, but certainly you will start to break into that market of trying to get other sports in. I raised earlier that I think the gentleman from Rio Claro who made it onto the Atlanta Hawks, Garvin, you would know what I'm talking about.
Johnny Hamilton.
Johnny Hamilton, right. I'm a Rio Claro boy, so I feel proud about that originally. So, but I'm saying utilize some of these persons. In the past, when tourism went anywhere to promote Trinidad and Tobago, don't get me wrong, I love Brian Charles Lara, I love Dwight Joe. They're the best things in terms of sport in our country. But there must be other people that we add to the mix in terms of promoting our swimmers, our basketball personnel. And those are things we need to start thinking about. And this conversation is important because it raises a lot of questions. If we say to ourselves, okay, so that's our culture, that's how Caribbean life is, we're going to be saying the same thing here maybe 5 years from now.
Very interesting, to say the least. So, from what it is you're saying, let's look at the fact that last fiscal year and this fiscal year, there'll be continued upgrades of corporation grounds, Honeymoon Ground, Marak, Aranguez, Grand River, Tudds Road, and then the construction of community swimming pools, Maloney, Mova, Dabadi. Straight question. Do you agree with the continued upgrade of grounds, recreational grounds, as well as the construction of community swimming pools? And I'm just asking that question given, piggybacking on what Mr. Ramdeo would have said, we need to move from a two-horse race and encourage other horses to gallop to the front. So the government spending money on these facilities, is it the answer, or do we need to do some more? And I want to introduce the next swimming Olympian to the forefront. Miss John, you could show the, I mean, I'm talking swimming, so what's now? We speaking it into being now. We speaking it into being. Affirmation. But then,
oh gosh, yes.
Do you think that, again, just repeating myself, the continuous upgrade of corporation recreational grounds and the construction of these swimming pools are going to help us to answer the questions as regards to sport development, sport for development, and as Mr. Ramdeo said, add more horses to the race that is now presently a two-horse contention.
Well, I'll give it from a Tobago's perspective, and I'll give my opinion right now. I actually say no, and it is when you come to Tobago. I don't know when's the last time everyone's been to Tobago here. But when you come across and immediately realize almost every community in Tobago has some sort of sport facility in their vicinity. Most of it is a football field, basketball, netball court. You may have tennis there as well. But Tobago is an island of 61,000 or so persons. It is a monumental ask for the Division of Sport and Youth Affairs to maintain all these facilities. And I'm saying it's about maybe 16, 17 in Tobago. And I'm just kind of going off the top of my head with quick calculations. From Canaan, Bonaccord, all the way up to Charlottesville. That's a massive amount of funding that actually has to go to something that, if not checked correctly, you are going to find derelict facilities around very, very, very quickly. And it has shown itself to be an incredibly difficult task to consistently keep these facilities at the optimum. I know the division is actually looking at kind of refurbishing some of the facilities to make them a little bit more multi-sport friendly. But that is after watching these facilities actually run themselves down because of inactivity at the facilities. And you're asking, what you end up asking villages and areas that may have about 600 to 1,000 persons to consistently utilize the facilities when there isn't any real data that says the facility is going to be utilized on a constant basis by these 600 to 1,000 persons. So based on the Tobago experience, based on the numerous facilities, even in Shore Park, you can almost say it's partly underutilized and then massively overutilized depending on where you are in Shore Park. Tennis courts, basketball courts, a little less so. On the field, the multiple track and field clubs that would have been training there pre-COVID, and when I say multiple, on any given day you can find about 5. But then you go out, and many of the facilities would lay idle, except for persons maybe going to have a little sweat or something. And it's really a lot to ask for a government institution to consistently try to keep these facilities up. And I really don't see too much logic of doing it. Not in Tobago, Trinidad, and maybe different areas, yes. But it's a very, very difficult thing for me to actually watch and say, yeah, we really need to get more facilities. And while we have other facilities pretty much going to waste.
I don't think I was advocating for more facilities. I'm just saying, Richard, you're familiar with the statement, build it, they'll come?
Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to add one more. Promote it, they'll come.
Right.
Right. So that's the point I'm making. I'm not advocating to build more. I'm saying promote it. And let's take swimming, for example. I have an idea, which I wouldn't share here. Someone will have to pay me for it. But I have an idea for swimming that if I am allowed to execute that, I bet you anything that swimming will have quite a tremendous interest in it. And those are the kind of things I'm talking about. We have to start thinking beyond where we are and we have to start looking at our environment for opportunities. Um, all the facilities in the world, you're correct. We'll have many facilities and no one will come. But if we don't find ways of promoting our sport and engagement, that's a new thing in the world, sport, fan engagement. If we don't engage our fans when they come to the game, you look at the IPL. It just concluded a few days ago in India. I've had the privilege of being to India for the World Cup in 2011, and I saw some what they're able to do with fan engagement. The giveaways, they engage. You get the ball at the end of a game. I mean, that means so much. We have to start looking at ways how we can engage our fans. We have them online now, and those are the kinds of strategies that we have to put in place now if we want to improve our sport based on the resources that we currently have.
So for me, I just wanna add in here quickly, and tying it back to the specific grounds that would have been selected. My question is, what data drives some of those decisions? Is it participation? Is it programs? Because we are talking about developing these facilities, but are there programs that are being structured to be implemented at these specific facilities that have caused them to be identified? The other thing is, okay, if we have, I mean, we are all balancing the lower revenues, and therefore, how do we engage? I mean, we've started, or the government had started a conversation and continues with the PPPs, public-private partnerships. How do we engage? Okay, yes, this is our prioritization as a government, but how do we engage a sports club from Caroni or from Rio Claro or from Diego Martin to support the specific ground or court or field or whatever you are participating to make sure, because at the end of the day, these facilities in specific communities was developed for purpose, is for participation in sport, health and wellness, to facilitate those elements within your communities. And if you have capable sporting organizations or capable sporting clubs within Trinidad and Tobago, within those communities that are willing to say, okay, we could assist in these positions. Why not facilitate it? Because let's be real, let's be frank, we cannot facilitate from a government standpoint. We cannot maintain the number of grounds and the number of facilities that we have in Trinidad and Tobago. There has to be a level of prioritization, and it has to come from a bigger strategic plan in terms of what we are focusing on, what programs we are planning to develop, that will guide those decisions in terms of maintenance and even to build. I would be very honest with you. I don't think there's a need to build another facility. We are 10 minutes away, 15 minutes away from a swimming pool, from a community, or worse yet, a cricket ground. We walk in distance from one cricket ground to another, or football field. There is absolutely no reason for us to build another. We have to maintain, and I continue to say that from where I sit, we have to maintain and maintenance with a plan to facilitate programs.
Yeah, and that's the point that I want to hop on. Programming is what keeps facilities active, and what we have at the moment are just the facilities and no programming or little programming at these facilities. And therefore it's through our programming we will be able to market the sport, and attract people to use the facility, and the facility can generate revenue as well, because one of the economic activities of facilities is rentals, and then that would then spiral into a vibrant sporting community. And the thing about it is that we've had vibrant sporting communities before. Santa Cruz has been a very active sporting community, and there are several others around the country. But we have to look at what is happening at the product. And when we talk about the product, we're talking about the coaches, we're talking about the refereeing, because when people become disgruntled with at that micro level, that's where we have the fallout. That's where nobody wants to go to that basketball field because nobody have behavior and all these different things. And I think those are the things that we have to that we looking at. And I must commend the Ministry of Sports during the pandemic, putting on courses to help facilitate that development with the TTOC, help facilitate that development of the coaches as well as the administrators, and helping persons who say, I want to start a basketball team, understand their role within the community for sports. And I think we don't have a culture of sport for different outside of cricket and football because people just don't know the other sports. You know, people like I'm a rugby player, and if I go south and I ask, do you know about rugby? They will tell me no, you know, that kind of way. So, in certain parts of South, of course. So it's just again, as Carl was saying, is about marketing yourselves and ensuring that people who are delivering your product or sport are safe and not, you know, are safe to develop your sporting product.
Excellent point. If I make one point there, and it's to add to what Ms. John is saying, and she's correct, programming. And I want to take it back to when I was in the communities. So people in the communities are no longer interested because there's no interest for them. When I was a youngster growing up in Rio Claro, there was a ground called Shell Ground. On that ground, that was a ground with a turf wicket, not a matting wicket, for those of you who know cricket. That ground, we as youngsters, we were able to, given time off from school, to go to that ground to see young England schoolboys play a young Southeast. Many of these young England schoolboys, they went on to play for England. Mark Ramprakash, Nasser Hussain, I'm calling names of international cricketers. And that's the point I'm making. If you neglect the rural areas and the community areas, and they're not allowed, the youngsters are not able to see. Persons play the sport, basketball, for instance. I lived for a long time in the country, and I never saw basketball at any great level played other than in the community center ground. We need to start doing things like that. Football, for instance, as well. Why not have why is it only in Port of Spain or in Arima you have these big matches? Why not take them out to the community and start getting the youngsters? You may very well find new talent there. Maybe another Dwight York somewhere in Trinidad and Tobago, as is a Brian Lara, as is another Johnny Hamilton. And that is the point I've been making as well. How do we engage the communities to find these new young talents and a new pool of talent that we need?
As we started the conversation, sorry, Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think, Carl, with what you just said, I'm taking it a little bit international. The U.S. soccer, they had a kind of whole all over the country developmental setup, and with the new institution of their new management, they scrapped it. And one of the things that they were actually talking about was that they weren't necessarily getting the full talent pool to choose from. And because, I mean, as organized sports go, it gets very expensive very fast. And that's a bit of what was taking place. So you would have these youngsters in these underprivileged communities or in rural communities, and they may be very good potential talent for the future of soccer in the US, but they weren't being picked up at all. So so the US actually scrapped that development academy policy they had, and they kind of went and opened it up. Maybe what we are seeing right now with the US national team is exactly what came out of that policy, because a lot of these young players are now getting opportunities to develop their game in a way that wasn't there before, and even to do it in a setting that gives them the best opportunity to develop. And sometimes that setup is not necessarily the most organized setup. It could just simply be them going out on the field and enjoying the game, and then someone just passing and seeing them and say, you know what, maybe this person should get an opportunity to push their talents forward. So, it's interesting, you brought that up because for what I saw the US system make that change to be almost totally inclusive. Anyone, anywhere, anytime, anyhow.
Yeah.
And I believe based on it, we've actually seen the benefits and quite a few other players actually now playing in Europe in some of the top clubs there. So that just a small change like that could be very, very critical in the better functioning of some of our local organizations, uh, putting their sport out in the forefront and getting the recognition that maybe they deserve to get. And, being able to take that newfound um, national reach and pushing it a bit more within their sport and within the sporting organization. So yeah, it's definitely something that should be considered.
So I just want to, Jeffrey, I would just want to add to Goddard in the sense of what Goddard shared with us is sport for all, and oftentimes we have sport for podium or sport for scholarship or sport for gas out the community or sport for, we seldom have sport for the person who just want to enjoy the sports. The athletes or the young athletes or even the older athletes are, always pressured for performance. And the reality is not everybody wants sport for performance. And therefore it's for the NSOs to create a product as we say and make it available for person who just want to learn to play for playing, play for health, play for friendship, and just be healthy. And I think when I looked at the 2021 budget review and 22, there's that difference in the there was a difference where the Ministry of Health depended on sport for programming to keep the nation healthy. And with such most of the conversation we've had has been about sport performance. And where, for me, when I read the documents that the government is sharing, most are speaking about sport for development, sport for health and well-being, etc. And I think we really have to pay attention to that conversation and meet help help build our nation through sport.
As we started the conversation, so we would like to end the conversation. As I said, the mission of the Department of Physical Education and Sport is to enhance lives through participation, quality, training, and excellence in sport. The two pillars of the national sporting policy are one, total participation of sport, and high performance. The national budget statement for the fiscal year 2022 has an expenditure that last Friday was accepted of 297,761,000. After 1 hour and 44 minutes of great conversations, I ask for your closing remarks. Was it enough? Do we have to rely on the Ministry of Sport and Community Development to continue to be our supplier of bread and butter? Or should we, as the minister said, continue to be resilient, noting that our return to play 2022 is just around the corner? Closing remarks, and I start with lady first, Ms. John.
I think that it may not be enough, but it is what we have to work with. It is what we have to work with. And it's up to us to be creative and look for the opportunities to continue to strive in going forward.
Mr. Goddard.
Well, I'm pretty much I'm probably going to say this for everybody. The amount simply is never usually enough. It's it's not enough at all. But it is what we have to work with. And as Carl had said earlier, it's an unique opportunity to reinvent our sport and the way we deliver sport in Trinidad and Tobago. So, it is exactly what it is. It's a pandemic allocation, and we have to work with it. But in reality, we have an opportunity to do things a little bit differently, and I think we should really and truly explore that opportunity to the full extent that we can. And who knows, we may come up with something that's uniquely Trinbagonian, but so unique that it's definitely, it may be a shining star for the rest of the Caribbean going forward.
Mr. Ramdeo?
I will end as I began. One thing the pandemic has done is given us a lot of time. And certainly that time, I'm sure all of us have used it to think, to ponder on not just our own personal circumstance, but certainly the future of our country, Trinidad and Tobago, and certainly where we have a deep-seated interest, which is in sport. I think the conversation will go on for some time in terms of what do we do from here. We know for a fact there's limited resources face us, and I know as a people we will find ways. We'll continue to dig deep and find ways to come up with new avenues for sustaining our sports as we keep it alive, and for producing, as Ms. John said, producing an opportunity for everyone to enjoy sport, not just for those who do well and for those who sit and look at it, but everyone can enjoy it wherever you are. So I am very optimistic that despite the scarce resources, we are going to find ways to enjoy sport and play sport better in the future.
Mr. Warwick?
So for me, in closing, it's really, we know the tightening of the belt has taken place and continues to take place. And we have to be very innovative as people in terms of our approach to developing sport and sport as a business, because that's the way forward for us. Yes, we want to grow sport for all, but we also have to focus on the sport as a business because it requires us to become a little more self-sufficient. And the pandemic has shown us that, and of course, sporting organizations have to utilize the time and would have utilized the time to build their own capacity and sit back and do their strategic planning so that when we come out of this pandemic and we are free to play, that we are a little more structured, we are a little more educated, we are a little more informed, and we have strategic direction from an NSO and from a government to move sport in Trinidad and Tobago forward.
It is with great pleasure, on behalf of the Futsal Association of Trinidad and Tobago, I want to say thank you to Ms. Kwanieze John, Sport for Development and Practitioner, Mr. Carl Ramdeo, General Manager, Sales and Marketing at the Trinidad and Tobago Postal Corporation, Mr. Richard Goddard, Boys Program Head Coach at Bishop's High School, Tobago, and Mr. Garvin Warwick, Past President at the National Basketball Federation of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you, ladies and gents, for really gracing the studios of Futsal868 to be a part of Corner Talks on this episode. And we thank you and we appreciate everything that you have done for us and the insightful contributions you have made to this very, 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 very interesting topic that is sport and the national budget. We pray God's richest blessings to you and each of your family members. And please be safe. And as we say right now, two things we actually saying right now is take it easy. And as the budget says, be resilient. We continue our celebration of World Mental Health Day, and we ask you all to take care of yourselves in every form or fashion. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
So that was another episode of Futsal868 Corner Talks. I want to say thank you very much to our host. I mean, literally, we could have gone on and on. We honestly said it was going to be 75 minutes, but we have gone over time. And with extra time comes a lot of excitement, and definitely there was a lot of excitement when it comes to this particular show. And we're happy for you, the guests staying on, and also those who stayed with us throughout the program. We thank you very much for that. And those who haven't caught us, you could definitely catch us the review on our social media pages, on our YouTube channel at Futsal868, as well as our Facebook page, again, at Futsal868. We leave you all with the sights and sounds of our cupcake sale, Cupcakes for Causes. We ask you to indulge with us, and we see you again next week. On behalf of the Futsal Association of Trinidad and Tobago, my name is Geoff Edwards. Have a great one. Bye-bye.